Montana Territory, 1872. In the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the Clark Fork River carved its patient path through the valley, two ranches stood like rival kingdoms. The Farley Ranch to the north with its sprawling pastures, and the Prescott Estate to the south with its grand white house on the hill. Between them ran an invisible line more dangerous to cross than any frontier border. It wasn't the land that truly separated them, but blood spilled 20 years prior when both families raced to claim the richest grazing territory in the valley. Samuel Farley knew this history better than most at 26, having grown up hearing his father's bitter accounts of Jasper Prescott's underhanded dealings. Samuel believed what most men on the frontier came to understand, that trust was a luxury and family loyalty the only true north. He had built his life around a simple belief, that a man stood alone against the harshness of the frontier, that relying on others was weakness, and that the Prescott name represented everything dangerous about opening your heart. The April morning dawned clear and cold as Samuel rode the boundary line, checking for breaks in the fence his father had ordered maintained at all costs. His chestnut gelding picked its way carefully along the rocky slope as Samuel surveyed the valley below. His breath clouded in the morning air, his lean frame bundled against the lingering winter chill. At 26, Samuel carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd been working cattle since before he could properly hold a rope. The frontier had shaped him, his broad shoulders from breaking horses, his tanned face from endless days under the Montana sun, the light stubble that shadowed his strong jaw. Yet there remained a boyishness about him, especially when he smiled, which wasn't often these days. Not since his father had fallen ill, leaving Samuel to manage their struggling ranch. "The land doesn't care who you trust, son," his father had told him from his sickbed. "It only cares who works it. And a man who divides his mind between work and sentiment will lose both." Samuel had taken those words to heart. He wanted simple things: to save the ranch, to restore his father's health, and to live by the code of self-reliance that had gotten them this far. What he needed, though he wouldn't admit it, was something to believe in beyond survival. The crack of a rifle shot broke the morning silence. Samuel's horse reared, nearly throwing him from the saddle. When he regained control, he spotted a figure on horseback across the ravine, rifle raised to the sky. "You're on Prescott land, cowboy." The voice carried across the distance, feminine but firm. Samuel squinted against the morning sun. The rider nudged her horse forward, revealing a young woman with a Winchester repeater balanced confidently across her saddle. As she approached, he could make out her features: high cheekbones, determined eyes, and blonde hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She wore a practical riding dress in deep blue, modified for the saddle, its color vivid against the muted spring landscape. "I'm exactly on the boundary line, miss," Samuel called back, keeping his voice even despite his annoyance. "Your father doesn't own the whole territory, whatever he might think." The woman guided her horse closer until they were merely 20 feet apart, separated by a narrow ravine. "I know exactly where our property lines fall, Mr. Farley." She emphasized his name with clear recognition. "And you've drifted a good 50 yards onto our grazing land." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Victoria Prescott." She straightened in her saddle. "Jasper Prescott's daughter." The morning sun caught on her features, illuminating her face. She couldn't be more than 22, Samuel thought, noting the determined set of her jaw and the clear intelligence in her blue eyes. He'd heard rumors of Prescott's daughter, educated back east and recently returned, but had never encountered her. "Well, Miss Prescott," Samuel said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "I've ridden this boundary my entire life. If there's been a recent redrawing of the maps, I wasn't informed." Victoria reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a folded document. "There hasn't been a redrawing, Mr. Farley. Just an acknowledgement of the original survey. Your father knows perfectly well which creek marks the true boundary." She gestured to a thin line of water nearly obscured by brush some distance behind him. Before Samuel could argue further, hoofbeats approached from the south. 3 Prescott ranch hands appeared, their expressions hardening at the sight of him. "Everything all right, Miss Victoria?" the lead rider called. "Fine, Thomas," she replied without taking her eyes off Samuel. Mr. Farley was just leaving. Samuel looked from Victoria to the approaching men, calculating his odds. Pride urged him to stand his ground, but practicality whispered otherwise. With a curt nod, he turned his horse. "This isn't settled," he called over his shoulder. "That water rights document your father waved in front of the territorial judge last summer doesn't change 20 years of established boundaries." As Samuel rode away, he couldn't shake the image of Victoria Prescott's confident posture or the flash of something unexpected in her eyes. Not hatred or contempt, but curiosity. It unsettled him more than any threat could have. 3 days later, Victoria found herself staring at ledger books in her father's study, the columns of numbers swimming before her tired eyes. Since returning from her schooling in Boston 8 months ago, she had discovered the ranch's finances were in worse shape than her father admitted. At 22, she had expected to find her place in Montana society, perhaps meet a suitable gentleman from one of the emerging mining towns, but instead found herself secretly managing the ranch accounts while her father's health declined. A commotion outside drew her to the window. In the yard below, ranch hands were gathered around a man on horseback, a stranger. No, not a stranger, she realized. Samuel Farley, looking as uncomfortable as a wolf in a trap. Her father's foreman, Thomas, was gesturing angrily while Samuel's hand hovered near his holster. Victoria hurried downstairs and out onto the porch. "What's happening here?" The men turned, Thomas stepping forward. "Found this Farley riding near the south pasture, Miss Victoria. Says he's looking for strays, but we all know what his kind really wants." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm tracking 3 yearlings with the Farley brand. Flash flood last night took out a section of fence along the creek." His eyes met Victoria's. "I'm not looking for trouble." "You found it anyway," Thomas spat. "Prescott land is off limits to Farley's." Victoria studied Samuel. Despite his obvious tension, he maintained a dignity that impressed her. His brown hair fell across his forehead, slightly too long, as though he hadn't had time for such trivial matters as a haircut. His eyes, a deep, forest green, held hers steadily. "Let him look for his cattle," Victoria said finally. "Thomas, have 2 men accompany Mr. Farley to ensure he finds only what belongs to him." Thomas began to protest, but Victoria silenced him with a look she'd perfected in the months since taking control of the ranch operations. "Thank you, Miss Prescott," Samuel said with genuine surprise. "Don't mistake practicality for kindness, Mr. Farley," Victoria replied, surprised at her own boldness. "Neither of our ranches can afford to lose stock needlessly." As the men rode out, Victoria returned to the study, finding it impossible to focus on the ledgers. There was something about Samuel Farley that didn't match the villain her father had described throughout her childhood. She had expected arrogance, not the quiet competence she'd witnessed. Her father's stories echoed in her mind, how the Farleys had tried to swindle them out of water rights, how they rustled cattle and threatened their hands. Growing up, she'd believed that survival in this harsh territory meant maintaining clear divisions between friend and foe. The Farleys were decidedly in the latter category. Yet something about that certainty felt hollow now, like a book she'd outgrown. The cattle were found by sunset, but as luck would have it, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. Samuel and the Prescott hands took shelter in an old line cabin on the property border. The close quarters forced conversation, and Samuel discovered the men knew as little about the original feud as he did, only that loyalty demanded they uphold it. As Samuel prepared to leave at first light, Victoria appeared unexpectedly, bringing supplies on horseback. She dismounted gracefully, her blonde hair now loose around her shoulders, dampened by the morning mist. She wore a practical split riding skirt and jacket in forest green that complemented her slender figure. Against the backdrop of pine and mist, she looked like she belonged to the land itself. "Thomas sent word about the storm," she explained, handing over a package of provisions. "I thought you might need these before heading back." Samuel accepted the package, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Your hospitality surprises me, Miss Prescott." "Victoria," she corrected, then looked surprised at herself. "And perhaps I'm simply ensuring you have no reason to linger on our property." A smile tugged at the corner of Samuel's mouth. "I believe that's called strategy, Victoria. Call it what you like." She adjusted her gloves, avoiding his gaze. "My father would be furious if he knew I was here." "Is he still unwell?" Samuel asked, the question escaping before he could consider its propriety. Victoria's expression softened with worry. "His heart troubles him. The doctor says he needs rest, but she stopped herself. I shouldn't be discussing this with you. Because I'm the enemy? Samuel challenged gently. Because I barely know you, she countered. Samuel nodded toward the valley below, where both their ranches sprawled in the morning light. I've lived within shouting distance of your family my entire life. Yet this is the longest conversation I've ever had with a Prescott. Doesn't that strike you as strange? Victoria studied him, her blue eyes thoughtful. What are you suggesting, Mr. Farley? Samuel, he offered. And I'm not suggesting anything except that perhaps neither of us knows the full story of why our families hate each other. Before Victoria could respond, hoofbeats approached. She mounted quickly. I should go. Victoria, Samuel called as she turned to leave. Thank you for the provisions. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. This changes nothing between our families. But as she rode away, both knew something had already changed. The following weeks brought an unseasonable drought, straining both ranches as they scrambled to move cattle to available water sources. Samuel worked from dawn past dusk, his body aching, his mind consumed with calculations about how long they could sustain their herd before selling became inevitable. One evening, exhausted, he rode alone to check a spring that historically had remained viable even in the driest seasons. As he approached, he heard splashing. Drawing closer, he discovered Victoria kneeling beside the water, measuring its depth with a marked stick. She wore a simple blouse and riding skirt, her blonde hair pinned up but coming loose in the evening heat, tendrils framing her face. She startled at his approach, reaching instinctively for the revolver at her side. It's just me, Samuel called, raising his hands. Victoria relaxed slightly. You have your own water sources, Samuel. Not as many as we need in this drought. He dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. This spring technically sits on shared land according to the original territorial survey, which your father contested, Victoria reminded him. Which both our fathers have manipulated to their advantage, Samuel corrected. He gestured to her measuring stick. How bad is it? Victoria hesitated, then sighed. Down 8 inches from last week. At this rate. She didn't finish the thought. Samuel crouched beside the spring, careful to maintain space between them. My father would sooner lose everything than cooperate with your family. He'd rather watch both ranches fail than acknowledge we're facing the same problem. My father says similar things about yours, Victoria admitted. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It makes no sense. The water exists regardless of who claims it. Perhaps that's the problem. They're so focused on ownership, they've forgotten about stewardship. Samuel picked up a stone and turned it in his hand. I've been studying ways to conserve and distribute water more efficiently. Techniques they're using in Colorado. Victoria's eyes sparked with interest. I read about those methods in an agricultural journal. Irrigation channels and collection pools. Samuel looked up, genuinely surprised. You read agricultural journals? Is that so shocking? Her chin lifted in challenge. I attended Bryn Mawr College. Women are quite capable of understanding water management systems. Samuel raised his hands in surrender, a smile breaking across his face. I meant no offense. I'm just not accustomed to discussing irrigation techniques with a woman or a Prescott. Either, he admitted with a chuckle. For a moment they sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, the tension between them shifting into something neither could quite name. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold, casting a warm glow across Victoria's features. Samuel found himself noticing the small freckles across her nose, the thoughtful curve of her mouth. We could implement these systems together, Victoria suggested suddenly. Share the resource. It would benefit both ranches. Our fathers would never agree. Then we don't tell them, Victoria said, her voice lowered conspiratorially. At least not until we've proven it works. Samuel studied her, seeing determination and intelligence in equal measure. You're proposing we meet in secret to build an irrigation system? I'm proposing we be practical instead of prideful. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Unless you'd rather watch your cattle die of thirst on principle. Samuel rose to meet her gaze. When would we start? Tomorrow. Dawn. Bring whatever tools you can carry without raising suspicion. Victoria gathered her belongings. And Samuel? If you betray this trust, you'll find I'm just as formidable an enemy as my father. I believe you, he said, and meant it. Over the next 3 weeks, they met at dawn near the contested spring. Working together, they dug channels and constructed small dams, creating a system that maximized the limited water. Their hands blistered and their muscles ached, but the shared purpose created a bond neither had anticipated. During these meetings, between discussions of water flow and soil conditions, their conversation gradually ventured into personal territory. Samuel spoke of his mother's death when he was 12, how it had hardened his father. Victoria shared her frustration at being educated for a world that didn't exist in Montana territory, her determination to prove herself useful despite her father's traditional views. "He sent me east to become a proper lady," Victoria said one morning, wiping sweat from her brow as they rested in the shade of a pine tree. "I think he expected me to return with a wealthy husband who could save the ranch." Samuel handed her his canteen. Instead, he got a daughter who understands ledgers better than he does. Victoria looked at him in surprise. "How did you know about the ledgers?" "The way you talk about cattle prices and operating costs. That's not knowledge you pick up casually." Samuel leaned back against the tree trunk. "Your father doesn't realize what an asset you are." "Neither does yours," Victoria observed. "You have ideas that could transform the Farley ranch, but he's too stubborn to listen." Samuel sighed. "My father believes innovation is just another word for risk, and risk means potential failure. Sometimes the greater risk is in standing still." Victoria's hand rested inches from his on the ground between them. "Like this feud. It's costing both our families more than either can afford." "What started it?" Samuel asked. "The real story, not the version our fathers tell." Victoria shook her head. "I only know my father claims your father betrayed him when they first arrived here. Something about a land claim and a woman." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "A woman? That's never been part of the story I heard." "What version did you hear?" "That your father cheated mine out of his rightful water access, then threatened him when he protested." Victoria frowned. "That doesn't sound like my father. And betrayal doesn't sound like mine." Samuel turned to face her fully. "What if everything we've been told is clouded by 20 years of bitterness?" Their eyes met, and in that moment, the distance between Farley and Prescott seemed to vanish. Samuel found himself aware of Victoria's proximity, the sweep of her eyelashes, the curve of her lips. Before he could stop himself, his hand moved to cover hers on the ground between them. Victoria didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly around his. "We should get back to work," she said softly, though she made no move to rise. "We should," Samuel agreed, equally motionless. The spell broke only when a distant gunshot echoed through the valley, likely a ranch hand hunting, but it reminded them of the world beyond their sanctuary. As July gave way to August, the irrigation system proved successful. Small pools now collected water that would have otherwise been lost to the parched ground, providing relief to both herds. Their meetings continued under the pretext of maintenance, though both recognized they had created something beyond the physical infrastructure, a fragile bridge between rival worlds. On a particularly hot afternoon, Victoria arrived at their meeting place to find Samuel had prepared a small picnic. Nothing elaborate, just bread, cheese, and apples, but the gesture touched her deeply. "What's the occasion?" she asked, settling beside him on the blanket he'd spread beneath a cottonwood tree. "We've been working for weeks without celebrating our success," Samuel replied, handing her a slice of apple. "Seems worth acknowledging." Victoria accepted the fruit, their fingers brushing. Such moments of contact had become more frequent, each touch lingering a little longer than necessary. "It is remarkable what we've accomplished," she agreed, "though I sometimes wonder if we're merely delaying the inevitable." "Which inevitable would that be?" "The collision of our worlds." Victoria looked toward the distant ranches. "My father's been asking questions about where I ride each morning, and Thomas watches me like a hawk." Samuel's expression sobered. "Has anyone followed you?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." She met his gaze directly. "Samuel, what are we doing?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their irrigation project. Samuel reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that meeting you has changed everything I thought I understood about loyalty and enemies." His hand lingered near her cheek. "Victoria?" The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. They scrambled to their feet as 3 riders appeared, Thomas and 2 other Prescott hands. "Miss Victoria," Thomas called, his tone cold as his eyes fixed on Samuel. "Your father's been asking for you." Victoria stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between the men and Samuel. "I was just checking the irrigation system." With him, Thomas dismounted, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Your father would be interested to know about this cooperation." "There's nothing untoward happening here," Victoria insisted. Thomas snorted. "A Prescott and a Farley meeting in secret for weeks? Nothing untoward." He turned to Samuel. "You stay away from her, Farley. This isn't just about some old feud anymore. Miss Victoria is spoken for." Victoria's head snapped toward Thomas. "What are you talking about? Your father didn't want to worry you with his health failing, but he's arranged a match with Edmund Hamilton, the banker's son from Helena." Thomas's smile was smug. "The agreement was finalized yesterday. Hamilton's money will save the ranch, and you'll be settled properly, as your father always wanted." The blood drained from Victoria's face. "He had no right. He had every right as your father and the head of this family," Thomas cut in. "Now come along home. This fantasy is over." Samuel stood rigid, his expression unreadable as he processed this revelation. Victoria turned to him, her eyes pleading for understanding, but he had already begun backing away. "Samuel, you should go." "Victoria," he said, his voice tight. "Your father needs you. Don't let them. It's better this way." Samuel interrupted, though the pain in his eyes contradicted his words. "This was never going to work. We were fooling ourselves." As Victoria was escorted away, she looked back to see Samuel standing alone by the spring they had saved together, his figure growing smaller with distance, already becoming a memory. The Hamilton engagement was announced formally the following week. Victoria moved through the preparations like a sleepwalker, smiling when appropriate, speaking when spoken to, but feeling hollow inside. Edmund Hamilton was pleasant enough, handsome in a polished way, educated and unfailingly polite. But when he spoke of their future, Victoria heard only the rushing of water through the channels she'd built with Samuel. She hadn't seen him since that day by the spring. The irrigation system continued functioning, serving both ranches silently, the only evidence of their shared vision. Her father's health improved slightly with the stress of financial ruin removed, and he spoke enthusiastically about the Hamilton connection. "The boy has capital to invest, Victoria, and connections in Helena. This union secures your future and the ranches." "And what I want doesn't matter?" Victoria asked quietly as they sat in his study one evening. Jasper Prescott frowned. "What you want is security and position. The Hamilton name provides both." "What if I want something else?" she pressed, gathering courage. "What if I want the freedom to choose my own path?" Her father's expression hardened. "Like your mother did? Running off with that surveyor when times got hard, abandoning her responsibilities?" He shook his head. "I sent you east to educate you, not fill your head with impractical notions." "Is that what happened with Mother? She left with another man." Victoria had always been told her mother died when she was young. The revelation staggered her. Jasper waved dismissively. "Ancient history. The point is, a woman needs security on the frontier. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford." Victoria sat silent, processing this new information about her mother, wondering what other family truths had been hidden from her. Meanwhile, Samuel threw himself into ranch work with reckless intensity, pushing his body to exhaustion to quiet his mind. His father noticed the change. "You're working yourself to death, son," Patrick Farley observed one evening as Samuel returned from a 16-hour day moving cattle. "What's driving you?" Samuel avoided his father's gaze. "Just doing what needs doing." This wouldn't have anything to do with Jasper Prescott's daughter getting engaged to that Helena banker, would it? Samuel's head snapped up. "How did you? This valley has no secrets." Patrick sighed, settling into his chair by the fire. "I've seen you riding to the north property line at dawn for weeks. Didn't take much to figure out what, or who, was drawing you there." "It's not what you think," Samuel began. "Isn't it?" His father's gaze was surprisingly gentle. "Son, I've watched you change these past months. There's only one thing that transforms a man that way." Samuel sank into the chair opposite his father, suddenly too tired to maintain pretenses. "It doesn't matter now. She's marrying Hamilton." Patrick studied his son for a long moment. "Did I ever tell you about Ellen Kincaid?" Samuel frowned at the unfamiliar name. "No. Who is she?" "The woman your mother and I sheltered when we first arrived in this valley. She was running from an abusive husband back east. Patrick's gaze drifted to the fire. Jasper Prescott was sweet on her. We all were. She was beautiful, kind. But she chose me. Understanding dawned slowly. The woman in the feud story. That was real. Patrick nodded. Jasper never forgave me. When Ellen died in childbirth with you, he claimed it was divine retribution. Said if she'd chosen him, she'd still be alive. Samuel absorbed this revelation in stunned silence. All these years of fighting over land and water. It was about a woman. It started that way, Patrick acknowledged. Then pride took over, and neither of us knew how to stop. He leaned forward. Son, I've let bitterness shape half my life. Don't make the same mistake. What are you saying? I'm saying if you love Victoria Prescott, don't let my feud stop you from fighting for her. Before Samuel could respond, frantic knocking interrupted them. A ranch hand burst in, breathless. Fire on the North Range. Moving fast with the wind. The prairie fire, started by a lightning strike, spread with terrifying speed, whipped by autumn winds after months of drought. Both ranches mobilized every available hand, but the blaze threatened to engulf everything in its path. Samuel coordinated the Farley Ranch's defenses, directing men to dig fire breaks and wet down buildings. As he worked, a rider approached at breakneck speed. Thomas from the Prescott Ranch, his face smoke-blackened. Farley, he shouted over the roar of the distant flames. Victoria's out there. Samuel's blood turned cold. Where? She rode out to warn the line cabin crew when the fire started. Nobody's seen her since, and the flames have cut off the return route. Without hesitation, Samuel mounted his horse. Which direction? Northeast, toward Eagle Ridge, Thomas called. Farley, the fire's moving too fast. It's suicide to go after her now. But Samuel had already spurred his horse forward, riding directly toward the advancing wall of flame and smoke. He knew the territory intimately, every ravine and ridge, every potential shelter. If Victoria was trapped out there, he would find her. The smoke thickened as he rode, making breathing difficult. His horse grew skittish beneath him, fighting against the instinct to flee. Samuel pressed onward, wrapping a damp bandana around his face. The heat became oppressive, the roar of the fire drowning all other sounds. He reached the line cabin to find it abandoned, the crew obviously evacuated. No sign of Victoria. Samuel pressed on toward Eagle Ridge, scanning desperately for any movement through the smoky haze. A horse's panicked whinny cut through the fire's roar. Samuel veered toward the sound, and there, trapped in a rocky outcropping, he spotted Victoria's mare, riderless and terrified. Dismounting, Samuel calmed the animal enough to check for injuries, finding none. Victoria, he shouted, his voice barely audible above the fire. Victoria. A faint coughing response came from behind a large boulder. Samuel scrambled over the rocks to find Victoria huddled in a small natural depression, her dress torn, her face streaked with soot. Samuel? Her voice was raspy from smoke. What are you doing here? Coming for you. He answered simply, kneeling beside her. Can you stand? Victoria nodded, wincing as she rose. My ankle. I fell when my horse spooked. Samuel assessed their situation quickly. The main fire had split, creating a circle that was rapidly closing around them. Their only chance was to find a path through the narrowest part of the encroaching flames. We need to ride out together, he said, supporting her weight as they made their way to the horses. There's a creek bed about half a mile east. If we can reach it, we might survive, Victoria finished, clutching his arm. Samuel, if we don't make it, we will, he insisted, helping her onto his more steady mount before taking the reins of her nervous mare. Hold tight to me. With Victoria's arms wrapped around his waist, Samuel guided his horse toward what appeared to be the thinnest line of fire, the mare following on a lead rope. The smoke was blinding now, the heat searing their skin even through clothing. Victoria pressed her face against Samuel's back, coughing violently. Just a little further, Samuel encouraged, though he could barely see through the smoke himself. The horse balked as they approached the wall of flame, but Samuel urged it forward with steady pressure. Now, he shouted, and they burst through the fire line in a desperate gallop, embers swirling around them, the mare breaking free in panic. They emerged into clearer air, the creek bed just visible ahead. Samuel pushed his horse to its limit, not slowing until they reached the shallow water. Only then did he realize Victoria had fallen unconscious against him, overcome by smoke. He lowered her gently to the creek bank, splashing water on her face. "Victoria, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face. "You came for me," she whispered. "Always," Samuel promised, cradling her against his chest as distant shouts indicated rescue parties approaching. Victoria reached up to touch his smoke-blackened face. "I can't marry Edmund." "I know," Samuel said, pressing his forehead to hers. "I won't let you go again." The fire ultimately spared both ranches, though it consumed significant grazing land. In its aftermath, Victoria recuperated in the Prescott house, her ankle healing slowly. Samuel sent daily messages, which her father intercepted and destroyed. Jasper Prescott accelerated the wedding plans, desperate to secure the Hamilton connection before Victoria could recover enough to resist. Edmund visited regularly, bringing flowers and sitting beside Victoria's bed, speaking enthusiastically about their future home in Helena. Victoria's responses grew increasingly distant, her thoughts always with Samuel. "You seem troubled, Miss Prescott," Edmund observed during one such visit. "I had hoped my company would bring you comfort during your recovery." Victoria studied the man her father had chosen, conventionally handsome with his neat mustache and fashionable clothes, unfailingly polite, and utterly wrong for her. "Mr. Hamilton," she began carefully, "have you ever wanted something so deeply that everything else paled in comparison?" Edmund shifted uncomfortably. "I believe practical considerations must guide one's desires, Miss Prescott. Passion fades, but security endures." "That wasn't my question," Victoria pressed. After a long pause, Edmund sighed. "No, Miss Prescott. I cannot say I have experienced such conviction." His gaze sharpened. "But I suspect you have." Victoria met his eyes directly. "I cannot marry you, Mr. Hamilton. It would be unfair to us both." To her surprise, Edmund nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. There's been no light in your eyes when you look at me." He rose from his chair. "I'll speak to your father." "Thank you," Victoria said, genuinely grateful for his understanding. Edmund paused at the door. "He's a fortunate man, whoever he is." When Edmund informed Jasper Prescott of the broken engagement, the old rancher's rage was fearsome. He stormed into Victoria's room, face flushed with anger. "You foolish girl. Hamilton was our salvation. What were you thinking?" Victoria sat up straight in her bed, no longer the dutiful daughter. "I was thinking I wouldn't sell myself to save your pride, father." "This is about that Farley boy, isn't it?" Jasper paced the room. "You'll throw away everything for some cowboy whose father stole what should have been mine." "Samuel stole nothing from you," Victoria countered. "And neither did his father." Jasper froze. "What do you know of it?" "Enough to recognize that your hatred has nothing to do with land or water." Victoria's voice grew stronger. "You loved a woman who chose Patrick Farley instead. That's the real reason for this feud." Her father's face drained of color. "Who told you about Ellen?" "Does it matter?" Victoria challenged. "What matters is that you've poisoned two families for 20 years because of wounded pride." "You understand nothing," Jasper spat. "Ellen would have lived if she'd chosen me. Your mother might have stayed if I hadn't been so bitter." His anger collapsed suddenly, revealing the grief beneath. "I've lost every woman I ever loved." Victoria softened at this glimpse of vulnerability. "You haven't lost me, father. But you will if you continue this path." Before Jasper could respond, shouting erupted from the yard below. Victoria hobbled to the window to see Samuel dismounting in front of the house, confronted by ranch hands with rifles raised. "Father, please," Victoria pleaded. "Don't let this end in more bloodshed." Jasper looked between his daughter and the scene below, conflict evident on his weathered face. Finally, he sighed heavily. "This changes nothing between the Farleys and me." "I'm not asking for peace between you and Patrick Farley," Victoria said. "I'm asking for the chance to choose my own future." Downstairs, Samuel stood his ground as Thomas and the other hands surrounded him. "I'm here to see Victoria," he announced. "I'm not leaving until I do." "You'll leave in a pine box if you don't turn around," Thomas threatened. "That's enough, Thomas." Jasper Prescott's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the house, Victoria leaning on his arm. "Lower your weapons." The ranch hands complied reluctantly. Victoria broke away from her father, moving as quickly as her injured ankle allowed towards Samuel. He met her halfway, steadying her with gentle hands. "I thought you were being kept from me," Samuel said softly. "When you didn't respond to my messages, I never received them," Victoria explained, glancing back at her father, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Samuel turned to face Jasper Prescott. "Sir, I've come to speak plainly. I love your daughter. I know our families have history. You know nothing of our history, boy," Jasper interrupted. "I know enough," Samuel countered respectfully. "I know it's cost both our families more than either can measure. And I know Victoria deserves better than to inherit our father's bitterness." Jasper studied the young man before him, seeing perhaps a shadow of Patrick Farley in his stance, but something else in his eyes: determination without hatred, strength without cruelty. "And what can you offer her?" Jasper challenged. "The Farley Ranch is struggling as badly as mine. We've developed an irrigation system that's already improving both our grazing lands," Samuel explained. "With Victoria's knowledge of modern agricultural methods and my understanding of the land, we could transform both properties." "Both?" Jasper's eyebrows rose. Victoria stepped forward. "Father, imagine what could be accomplished if the Prescott and Farley ranches combined resources instead of working against each other." "You're suggesting a merger?" Jasper sounded incredulous. "I'm suggesting a future," Victoria said firmly. "One built on cooperation instead of conflict." Jasper looked between them, decades of bitterness warring with the undeniable logic of their proposal and the clear love in his daughter's eyes. "Patrick Farley would never agree to this," he said finally. "He already has," Samuel revealed. "He gave me his blessing before I rode here." Victoria turned to Samuel in surprise. "Truly?" Samuel nodded. "He said he's tired of letting the past dictate the future." He took her hands in his. "Victoria, I didn't come here just to see you. I came to ask you to marry me. Not for land or water rights or to end a feud, but because loving you has shown me what kind of man I want to be." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as Samuel knelt before her, heedless of the mud and the watching ranch hands. "I have nothing grand to offer except this promise. I will spend every day working to build something worthy of your courage and intelligence. Will you marry me, Victoria Prescott?" Victoria glanced at her father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, then back to Samuel. "Yes," she answered, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel rose, drawing her into his arms as the ranch hands shifted awkwardly, uncertain how to react to this unprecedented situation. Jasper Prescott cleared his throat. "This doesn't mean Patrick Farley and I are suddenly friends," he warned. "Of course not, sir," Samuel agreed, unable to suppress his smile as he held Victoria close. "That would be asking too much. But perhaps it's time for new beginnings," Jasper conceded, extending his hand in a gesture that, while not quite peace, represented something like truce. The wedding took place the following spring, when the valley bloomed with wildflowers and new growth covered the fire-scarred land. The ceremony was held at the boundary line, with a wooden arch erected precisely where the properties met. Guests from both ranches sat on either side of the divide, the symbolism lost on no one. Patrick and Jasper maintained a careful distance throughout the celebration, exchanging only the briefest acknowledgments, but they raised their glasses in unison when the time came to toast the newlyweds. As Samuel and Victoria spoke their vows beneath the Montana sky, they pledged not only their love to each other, but their commitment to healing the land and the community divided for too long by the stubbornness of proud men. At the reception, held in a newly constructed barn purposely built on the property line, Victoria found a moment alone with her father. "Are you happy, daughter?" Jasper asked, looking older but somehow lighter than he had in years. "Happier than I believed possible," Victoria confirmed, watching Samuel laughing with friends across the room. "Thank you for letting go, father." Jasper followed her gaze. "He's a good man. Better than his father." He squeezed her hand. "Better than me, too." Victoria embraced him tightly. "There's still time to write a different ending to your story." Across the room, Samuel approached Patrick Farley, who stood awkwardly at the periphery of the celebration. "Not so bad, is it?" Samuel asked, "being in the same room with Jasper Prescott without reaching for your pistol?" Patrick snorted. "The day's not over yet." They watched as Jasper approached cautiously, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Patrick without a word. Patrick hesitated, then accepted the glass. The two old adversaries stood in uncomfortable silence until Jasper spoke. Ellen would have hated what we became, he said quietly. Patrick stared into his whiskey. Yes, she would have. Maybe it's not too late to be men she wouldn't be ashamed of, Jasper suggested, raising his glass slightly. Patrick considered this, then raised his glass in return. To Ellen, he said simply. To Ellen, Jasper echoed. Samuel slipped away, leaving the old men to their tentative reconciliation, and found his bride waiting for him on the dance floor. What miracle is happening over there? Victoria asked, nodding toward their fathers. Samuel drew her into his arms. The same one that happened to us. Discovering that the line between enemy and family is thinner than we thought. Victoria smiled up at him. And now we blur that line forever. 1 year later, Victoria stood on the porch of the new house built exactly on the property line, watching as riders approached from both directions. To the north came Patrick Farley with several hands. To the south, Jasper Prescott with his crew. Between their combined efforts over the past year, the irrigation system had expanded to cover most of the grazing land. The herds had flourished despite a harsh winter, and the Farley Prescott Ranch had gained recognition throughout the territory. Samuel emerged from the house, placing a protective hand on Victoria's rounded stomach. Ready? He asked softly. Victoria nodded, watching as the patriarchs dismounted and approached the house, still maintaining a careful distance from each other, but no longer radiating hostility. Gentlemen, Samuel greeted them. Thank you for coming. You said it was important, Patrick replied gruffly. Victoria stepped forward. We wanted you both here for the announcement. She glanced at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. We've decided to name the baby Ellen if it's a girl, after the woman who, in her own way, brought all of us together. The old men exchanged a startled look, decades of shared history passing between them in an instant. Something shifted in their weathered faces, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of a shared grief and, perhaps, a shared future. And if it's a boy? Jasper asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Samuel smiled. We thought we'd name him Hope. As the sun set over the valley, casting long shadows across land that no longer recognized boundaries, the extended family gathered around the table in the house that straddled two worlds. The old feud hadn't disappeared entirely. Too much bitterness remained for that, but it had transformed into something new, something that allowed for the possibility of healing. Victoria, watching Samuel with their fathers, recognized that what had begun as a forbidden love had indeed changed everything. Not by erasing the past, but by creating space for a future where the children of Farleys and Prescotts would grow up knowing only one ranch, one family, and one unbroken horizon.